Good evening and welcome to to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Kenny McBride and joining us tonight is Rosa Sally. Rosa, how are you? Rosa, you of course were one of the Glasgow girls and I'm sure we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But first, the first story, unsurprisingly, is on Brexit again. Today the Scottish Government has said that it can't recommend that legislative consent is given to the government's withdrawal agreement bill. Mike Russell today wrote to James Duddridge, the Under-Secretary of State for the Brexit Department, saying essentially that the Scottish Government couldn't accept the withdrawal agreement as it stands. He's described the approach of the UK government to the passage of the bill as irresponsible and disrespectful of the legislatures of these islands and the devolution settlements. It's essential that it should receive scrutiny in all of the UK's legislatures, that there should be the proper opportunity for civil society to consider it, and for citizens to understand its meaning and significance, and for all constitutional conventions, including the Sewell Convention, to be respected during its passage. Now, as we know, the Sewell Convention has been ignored at least once, and I think possibly more, during the process of Brexit so far. And this does mean that if the withdrawal agreement is going to pass, then it would need to be, Scotland's legislative consent would need to be ignored once again. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson has said that if the withdrawal bill can't be agreed quickly, then he would have to seek elections before Christmas. Speaking in Parliament today, the Prime Minister said a vote against his timetable would delay Brexit for 3 months if the EU decides to grant the extension that he was forced to request by the Benn Act. He said, "I will in no way allow months more of this. If Parliament refuses to allow Brexit to happen and instead gets its way and decides to delay everything until January or possibly longer, in no circumstances can the government continue with this. And with great regret, I must say the bill will have to be pulled and we will have to go forward with a general election." Of course, it's not necessarily possible that Boris Johnson can make that decision by himself. He would need the support of some other parties or other people, at least, within Parliament. And at the moment, without any guarantee that no deal will be stopped, there is no guarantee that those other parties would agree to a general election. We are just hearing that at Westminster right now, there is a vote going on the second reading of the bill. If that passes, there will then be a vote on the programme motion to get this business of the House through. So the second vote reading, I'm just hearing in my ear, is happening right now. So we will go to that once it comes back. But in the meantime, Rosa, this Brexit chaos just never seems to stop. What do you make, first of all, of Michael Russell saying that the Scottish Government doesn't intend to give legislative consent to the proposals?
Well, I've seen the letter just today, and it's basically Scotland's voices is being ignored times again, and we've seen this many times. And as he has written in his letter, that Scotland bills or acts is being basically not respected.
Mm-hmm.
So really what the Scottish people have also, we have to not forget that they have voted majority to remain,
mm-hmm.
and that is not being respected by the UK government. So really it's just Scottish voices not being heard in the UK Parliament,
mm-hmm.
and really it shows that as there is a deadlock, basically, as it shows that really we're not being represented and we're not being listened to in the UK Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
The Scottish National Party, they have been ignored and basically not listened to. Is really frustrating, and is a lot of uncertainty, and this is affecting people's rights, workers' rights, people's jobs, people's lives is all on the line, and the Tory government is making decision to leave without even having a say on this. there's been in favor of people's vote, people saying that the people should have another chance to, now they know what is the agreement, what is going to happen. If we withdraw from the EU, then the people should have another chance to express themselves. We live in a democratic country. We should have that say, because it's a historical moment for the United Kingdom to leave the EU. And I mean, the Scottish people also have a say if they want to be part of the EU or they want to be an independent country within the EU. There's a lot of ideas that should be put through from the Scottish perspective, and that should not be ignored. So really, there's basically new ideas needs to be put forward, and that needs to be respected because the Scottish people want a new model, and that should be expressed.
Yeah. So with this, it does seem likely that any refusal to give legislative consent is likely to be ignored. We have seen the court case, I think that was last year, all seems to run into one, when the Sewell Convention was ruled to be not enforceable. That was more than a year ago, excuse me. So it does seem likely. What do you think how do you think the people of Scotland will react to that? Do you get the sense that something like that of the
so surprising.
The Holyrood being ignored will make more people think that maybe independence is the right road?
I hope so. I mean, if you're a sensible person, you want Scotland to be an independent country, but it's very hard to convince some people, and I think that is just it's basically our job to convince these people that Scotland, would be better off and would be much fairer and justice country, and we can rule ourselves, and if we're not happy with something, we can change it within our own Scottish government. And I think that is the important. We would be ruling ourselves in Scotland, and we would be an independent country. And I think it's very hard for me because I have my background as well. I believe in self-determination of people and a nation, and it's very hard for me because the Kurdish people would have dreamed of having a referendum and people just ticking a box and having their own independent as a country. And really for me, when I speak to people, sometimes they're like, no, I don't want to, and I'm like trying to talk to them like, what is the sense behind like making that decision? Is really, for me, I do not understand it, and it's really frustrating. Yeah,
well, we will come back to the issue around Kurdistan certainly shortly. Meanwhile, we're this stuff about Boris Johnson potentially seeking an election if he can't get this agreed. What do you think the prospects are of an election? Do you think do you think an election's likely? And secondly,
I think election is likely. There's going to be an election, but the question is, when is that going to happen? And as we see right now, I think Boris is trying to get a majority at the moment in the House of Commons, and probably if he does get that through, then I think it's likely that the general election will be next year. There will going to be a delay. However, if he doesn't, I think it's basically it will happen very shortly. The general election will be this year. So it just depends on what's going to happen tonight, really.
So what do you think is likely to come out from an election? We've seen, obviously, the SNP has a very clear message. They want to basically stop Brexit, at least for Scotland, and they want an agreement on a second independence referendum. The other parties, it's not exactly clear what they would be campaigning for. The Labour Party doesn't seem to have a coherent Brexit policy.
No.
The Tories, I think, will be torn between some who are hoping for no deal, perhaps in an attempt to head off the Brexit Party. The Brexit Party will certainly want no deal. There will be some Tories who are trying to soften the deal that's there. Some will be agreeing with Boris Johnson on this deal.
And there's also Liberals.
And then there's the Lib Dems who insist that they're anti-Brexit under all circumstances, but refuse to work with either Jeremy Corbyn or the SNP to prevent it. So what's your, I mean, with all that in mind, what is your feeling about what might
I'm not John Curtis, just so you know.
No, you've got much better hair for a start.
That's true.
But what do you think might be the outcome? First of all, in Scotland, and maybe if you've got any ideas about what might happen elsewhere.
I mean, I cannot predict what's going to happen, but I have the probabilities of what's going, because I am within the politics of today.
Sure.
And very interested in politics in Scotland. I think the Liberals will win a few seats. Well, they're going to have a number of seats taken from Labour and maybe Tories as well. However, I think SNP is going to get a majority of SNP back to the House of Commons, because the poll is looking good for them. Labour, I think, not so good. They're going to lose a lot of seats, so they would not want a general election. So I don't think it's in their interest in the Labour's party to have a general election, and I think Jeremy Corbyn already knows that. So they're trying to really delay as much as possible or not have a general election. And I think they're more pushing for like a people's vote, probably. I mean, a people's vote would be great, but I think we should also have a general election for the people to decide. But then the Tories, of course, they're going to lose a number of seats as well. So it's basically showing like what's going to happen, and I don't think the Tories is going to have a majority. They might not even have a government.
Yeah, it's. I mean, the prospect of a general election is worrying in a lot of ways, because it's not clear that it's going to produce anything like a stable majority.
No.
And if the Brexit Party is able to pick up even a few seats, that could be enough to have a huge impact.
Well, the two-party system is basically, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
After, if there's a general election, you will see a massive difference. So the two-party system is basically gone. And really will be left with kind of different parties making coalition agreements, probably.
Yeah, it's interesting that you spoke there about Labour's position on a second referendum. We have a story here from The Guardian, which says that the Shadow Brexit Secretary Keir Starmer has clashed with Shadow Cabinet colleagues over Labour's stance on a second referendum. At the weekly meeting of the Shadow Cabinet today, Starmer suggested that Labour policy meant the party must support any amendment that would call for a referendum on the deal and then have to campaign for Remain. But in a debate, according to a couple of people who were there apparently, colleagues including Ian Lavery and John Trickett faced a backlash from colleagues. And I'm just not sure, sorry, I'm just checking if we're...
It's a vote.
If we're going to get the results of this vote now, it does look like that's going to happen
Yeah.
fairly shortly.
Yeah, it seems like they're going to read it.
Are we going to switch over to Parliament just now? Okay, no, it's not quite happening yet. So we will just keep talking about this. So, what do you think about this? Labour have been at odds with itself for several years now. First, trying to decide on whether they wanted Corbyn as a leader, which they sort of do, or at least the membership does. And then this discussion over a second referendum, where it seems that Jeremy Corbyn and some on his wing of the party are opposed to it. Some, Keir Starmer obviously has been the leading force in trying to make a second referendum happen for the Labour Party. What do you think this does to the Labour Party, this kind of incoherence on Brexit?
Well, it's not good for the Labour Party, and there's a lot of division within the Labour Party, and I think that is something that is not appealing to many people, because they're for Brexit, they're not for Brexit, they're for Remain, they're not for Remain. It's just what are your stands are as a party, and I think they are, there's many Labour MPs are for Brexit, and I think for me it's very strange because you see in the trade union movement and STUC, TUC, they have a stance on to remain. They have policies to remain and in favor of remain because the trade union basically they know the effect on jobs and employment will be, and they don't want to lose
We are
jobs.
just going to go back to Westminster now.
The ayes to the right, 329. The noes to the left, 299.
The ayes to the right, 329. The noes to the left, 299. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock.
So that does mean that the second reading of the bill has been passed by 329 to 299, which is possibly a slightly bigger majority than some might have
I predicted
expected.
that.
Did you?
Yes.
Oh, well done.
Well, I did say that in the start that I predicted he'll get majority. I think he's done a convincing a few Labour MPs.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see where those votes did come from to make up a majority. That is interesting. We will now go on to the programme motion. There is no debate on that. That is just a vote, so we may get that relatively quickly. Again, if that comes up during the show, we will jump back to Westminster to talk about it. But we will move on from Brexit just now. There's obviously still some things going on that we may have to come back to before the end of the show, but this is obviously a subject quite close to your heart, Rosa. This is the Turkish assault on the Kurds in the north of Syria. We're hearing that hundreds of Kurdish fighters remain near to the northeastern border, despite a US brokered truce which demanded their withdrawal. And Turkey is saying now that it could resume its offensive in the area when the ceasefire expires, which is due to happen, I believe, tomorrow.
Yeah, there was a 5-day ceasefire, and
sorry, that's tonight. Excuse me.
Is it tonight or
that
tomorrow?
ceasefire is due to end.
Okay. Well, there's a meeting, I think, I haven't actually seen the update, but I know there was a meeting today between Putin, the Syria, and Erdogan in Turkey. But I've not actually seen what was the result of that. I've just been very busy working today. But unfortunately, what it seems likely is that what Erdogan wants in the region is the main point is, well, he says is to create a safe zone. That's what he says. However, that is not the reality of it. What he's trying to do is to change the the change of the region, the demographic change of the region, the areas, and most of this area is a Kurdish region areas, and he basically wants to bring in millions of settling refugees in these areas. And I think this is the problem, and as you know, Muslim, who is the leading of the YPG in the Syrian Democratic Forces, he has said this is a danger and it is an ethnic cleanse of the Kurdish people and the Kurdish people's towns. And the 400 kilometer that Erdogan wants to move into Syria and create this, it's actually against international law if you think about sovereignty of Syria. So really the Kurdish people really feel like betrayed by the international community, because we really believed in the United States that they would protect us once we have defeated ISIS, which we have defeated ISIS, and we, the Kurdish people, the Kurdish people in the Syrian Democratic Party have really sacrificed so many lives. If we think about how over 11,000 women and men have sacrificed their lives, this is not even including over 22,000 wounded people and the massive effect of these people. We've seen how much the fight has been going on, and it has been the Kurdish people fighting, and we've not been given any recognition or like a thank you for all your sacrifices, for all what you've done for the world. And instead we have been betrayed in the back. And really at the moment Erdogan is a NATO ally of the Western world. I don't believe that I don't believe that Turkey should be a NATO ally. We shouldn't accept a country that does not respect human rights, women's rights, LGBT rights, you name it. Thousands of journalists, politicians from HDP, the People's Democratic Party, are imprisoned by the Turkish government. And we are saying even journalists, people like yourself, are doing basically telling the truth to the public, making sure they know. They're all imprisoned. So thousands of people in prison, they can't even speak. And this is Turkish government. It believes in one flag, one language, one country. And that is not, you should be based on secularism. You should be based on accepting people's ethnicities, identities, who you are, because it's not just Kurdish people. There's Yazidis, there's Armenians, there's Arabs, there's many other ethnicity within that region. But thinking about the Kurdish people, they've created a really democratic society in Rojava. And Rojava, because basically Rojava stands for the Kurdish kind of west of Kurdistan. Because Kurdistan is divided within 4 countries, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and Iran. So really, this in Rojava, it's a really democratic kind of grassroots democracy is being created. They have already said. I mean, I don't see in anywhere around the world a society like that has been created. There's like a quota set for a woman representation needs to be 40% in every. Councils, in neighborhoods, there needs to be a representation of women. There's also a creation of co-chairs is being created. Like there needs to be a man and a woman making a decision in every sector of society. That could be health, education, and so on. But if you look at the politics of it and what they have created, what kind of system they have created, is just very democratic. It's a very radical democracy. So really, Turkey wants to destroy these ideas as well. He does not believe in these ideas, and I think it's for us. I see this as a beacon of hope for the Middle East, basically becoming more democratic, believe in women's rights. We don't have that in that region. We have to remember that women do not have the rights to speak in public, or women don't have the right of being equivalent to a man. And women's job is only to in the house, and your only job is to get married and have children, cook and clean. This is your basic. This is your job. The rest is not for you to do. So really, what the movement have set up in Rojava is actually make sure women are involved in every aspect of society, and I think that is very important. As a woman, I see this as an important model that has been created in the Middle East, and Turkey wants to destroy that model as well. So looking at all of the aspect, it's a disaster, and America has let the Kurdish people down, and this idea developing in the region, they've let us down, and the Kurdish people have no choice now. You know, your home is on fire, you've been attacked by a NATO, second largest NATO, which is Turkey, coming to your homeland. You have no choice. Who do you go to? You go to, well, they've now decided to see if Syria, they're going to help them. The Assad regime, they're going to help them because they have no other solution. And we cannot really trust Erdogan. It's a ceasefire for 5 days, but the killing is going to start soon. And we've heard that he's also used sulfur, basically things that should not be used in wars, chemical weapons, and against civilians. And I just saw yesterday that a child was burned all over his body because of this chemical weapon is being used, and it should not be used, and the United Nations have not done anything about it. The international community really have not criminalized or condemned his action, and Erdogan is allowed to do that. We are actually, the UK government is an ally to Erdogan and Turkey, and it's a shame, really is a shame, and we should not be supporting such a country.
Now, just for a wee bit of background, for anybody who isn't aware of your background, you came to Scotland from part of Kurdistan in northern Iraq, is that right?
Yeah.
And you came here, 15, 16 years ago?
18 years ago.
Yeah, 18, sorry. So, you've obviously, you keep an eye on this, but for people who don't know very much about it, as you said, Kurdistan covers parts of Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Turkey.
40 million Kurdish people.
Yeah, and they for a long time, I remember going back as far as the first Gulf War back in 1991, hearing about how badly treated the Kurds were by Saddam Hussein. But they're not particularly welcome in any of those four countries, are they? They've faced a lot of persecution from all four countries at different times. What is the kind of background to that? What is it about the Kurdish people that these other countries find,
Well, you have to go back to
difficult?
history, actually, what's happened to the Kurdish people. And that was the Sykes-Picot Agreement in the 1916. So really, that was decided by Britain and France, kind of imperials, kind of creating an empire around the world. And really, then over 100 years ago, they created Syria and Iraq. And the fall of Ottoman Empire. So it has a lot of history, and really, if you go back, you'll understand what's happened. And the Sofia Treaty was that basically the Kurdish people will be given a statehood, and there was an agreement between Britain and France to do so, but basically they let the Kurdish people down, and we were refused on the negotiation table. So the Kurdish people were divided between these four countries. So until today we are suffering for it, and the Kurdish people basically have been denied their cultural rights. They've been denied to speak their own language. They've been denied to say, I'm a Kurdish. I believe in Kurdistan. It's really like Nelson Mandela has said, a quote, if you really want to understand what it's like to be a Kurd, just for 1 day, for 1 hour, become a Kurd, and you'll understand how you'll be treated by these false states. And it's a shame that because they're not recognizing us and they're not democratic, these states.
Yeah.
They are all dictators, and we were not even given our parliament. We had to fight for it in north of Iraq. Many people, like you meet and you talk about because now we have a Kurdish parliament in Erbil, which is kind of equivalent to what you have in Scotland.
Yeah.
We fought for it, and Scottish people also fought for it. The parliament was not given to you. And really, my grandfather and my two uncles were executed by Saddam Hussein for basically speaking the truth that Kurdish people, basically fighting for Kurdish people, saying that we exist, we want our rights, why you not giving it to us? And many people were basically murdered. And we've seen in Anfal and Halabja and what Saddam Hussein has done to the Kurdish people, and it's all documented, it's all recorded. It's not something that it's all there, that prosecutions of Kurdish people. So today we're facing the same thing by Erdogan, and who thought that Saddam Hussein will be removed? But we saw him how he was hanged, and I'm sure that Erdogan will not stay there forever because he's a dictator, and the people at the end, democracy hopefully will win.
Well, speaking of democracy, we are just keeping an eye on what's happening at Westminster. We may go back very shortly for that programme motion vote. But as you said, the Kurdish people are quite well known, if insofar as anyone knows anything about them, is, as you said, for this real commitment to gender equality. It's something that, as you say, in that region is not exactly at the top of most nations' priorities. What's behind that? Is that something that's a traditional part of Kurdish culture? Is that something that's happened recently?
I can't say the Kurdish people are angels,
No.
But there is tribes as well, and there is people who are very kind of feudal and very backward. However, we have a society in Rojava which is set up in a way that is very democratic and believes in women's rights, and I think that's what it's very should be supported. But in the other regions of Kurdistan, the women have always played an important role in society, and women have not been ignored. But the problem is we've never been a state, therefore we've not been given those recognition.
Sorry, Rosa, we are just going to go back now to Westminster for the result of this vote.
Order!
The ayes to the right, 308. The noes to the left, 322.
The ayes to the right, 308. The noes to the left, 322. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlocked.
So that does mean the programme motion has been defeated by 322 votes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Saturday, this House emphatically rejected the Prime Minister's deal. Tonight, the House has... Well, you're too hasty. I've not finished yet. Tonight, the House has refused to be bounced into debating a hugely significant piece of legislation in just 2 days, with barely any notice and an analysis of the economic impact of this bill. The Prime Minister is the author of his own misfortune. So I make this offer to him tonight. Work with us, all of us, to agree a reasonable timetable, and I suspect this House will vote to debate, scrutinise and, I hope, amend the detail of this bill. That would be the sensible way forward, and that's the offer I make on behalf of the opposition tonight.
Point of order, the Prime Minister.
Point of order. Let me say in me say in response, Mr. Speaker, how welcome it is, even joyful, that for the first time in this long saga, this House has actually accepted its responsibilities come together and embraced a deal. I congratulate honourable members across the House on the scale of our collective achievement, because just a few weeks ago hardly anybody believed that we could reopen the withdrawal agreement, let alone abolish the backstop. That is indeed what they were saying. And certainly nobody thought that we could secure the approval of the House for a new deal. And we should not overlook the significance of this moment. And I pay particular tribute to those members of the House who were sceptical and who had difficulties and doubts and who decided to place the national interest ahead of any other consideration. But, Mr. Speaker, I must express my disappointment that the House has again voted for delay, rather than a timetable that would have guaranteed that the UK would be in a position to leave the EU on October the 31st with a deal. And we now face further uncertainty, and the EU must now make up their minds over how to answer Parliament's request for a delay. And the first consequence, Mr. Speaker, is that the government must take the only responsible course and accelerate our preparations for a no-deal outcome. But secondly, I will speak to EU member states about their intentions until they have reached a decision. Until they've reached a decision, I must say, we will pause this legislation. And let me be clear. Let me be clear. Our policy remains that we should not delay, that we should leave the EU on October the 31st, and that is what I will say to the EU, and I will report back to the House. And one way or another, we will leave the EU with this deal to which this House has just given its assent. And I thank members across the House for that hard-won agreement.
Point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I must say I find the response of the Prime Minister quite extraordinary. Because the facts of the matter are...
Order. The Right Honourable Gentleman is entitled to raise a point of order, and he is entitled to be heard. Let's hear the Right Honourable Member, and then we will expedite progress. Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The facts of the matter are this is yet another humiliating defeat for the Prime Minister this evening, who has sought to railroad through this House legislation that requires proper scrutiny. And rightly, this House has spoken with a very clear voice to tell the Prime Minister he is not on. And furthermore, it is absolutely crystal clear what should now happen, because there is legislation passed by this House. It is the law of the land, on the basis of not agreeing a deal, that the Prime Minister is instructed, Prime Minister, to seek an extension. Go to Brussels and do as you have been instructed, and do not put yourself offside against this Parliament. Mr. Speaker, it is crystal clear that this is a government that has no confidence, but a government that has sought to ignore the wishes of the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish people. It is obvious to us that if we want to guarantee our rights as EU citizens, then Scotland has to become an independent country. And I wonder to that end if you can advise me as to what we must do in this House, both in terms of securing the extension, but also in terms of protecting Scotland's national interest, as to what options are open to us.
The Right Honourable Gentleman, but I have a sense that his question...
Well, that does mean that the programme motion has not passed. That was 322 votes to 308. So that means that the government's plan to push this bill through Parliament in just 3 days won't now happen. Either the government will have to come back with some other plan to get the bill through, as Boris Johnson seemed to be indicating there. He did say that he intended for the country to leave with this deal on the 31st of October. So he presumably has other plans. Ian Blackford, we heard there, of course, calling for really for independence above all else, but pointing out that Scotland needs to be considered more closely in this deal. And Jeremy Corbyn inviting the Prime Minister to work with the Labour Party and others to negotiate a way forward. I somehow suspect that the Prime Minister will not be particularly warm to that idea. So we will have to keep an eye on that. We don't think there's anything else earth-shattering to come from Westminster tonight. If there is, we will again keep you updated. But as far as we know, there's nothing else we should be hearing before the end of the show. If you are interested in seeing what else is happening, we do have it on the broadcastingscotland.scot. If you go there and just search for the video, it will be there as under Westminster Live. We will be here until 8 o'clock as normal. So yeah, sorry about that, Rose. Just to go back to this situation, what's your feeling about what will happen next? Erdogan has said he intends to ramp up the assault on the Kurds in Syria at the end of this ceasefire. Do you think there's any likelihood of anybody stepping in at this stage to try and restrain Erdogan further?
I mean, the international community have basically kind of stopped giving arms trades. There's no longer trades of arms to Turkey, which is a good step forward. However, it's just a suspension. It's not basically saying, "Oh, I'm no longer gonna give you arms," and I think. For me, I think there should be a stop of that, and the international community need to act in a manner that really reflects on Turkey's behavior and actions against the Kurdish people and in Syria. And I mean, it's very clear that I believe. This is my point of view, and also there is also documents and records that Turkey has been supporting ISIS, and ISIS basically been treated in Turkish hospitals and basically rejoined fighting with ISIS, and this is it's already there, and basically Turkey wants division and catastrophe in the region, and has his hands in the country's matters. It's not just in Syria. Turkey has been also in Lebanon and Egypt, and you name it. Turkey is involved in these foreign countries' matters, and Turkey is thinking more like the Ottoman Empire. Like Erdogan wants to be a caliphate, wants to be the leader of the Muslims, and he shows himself as that. However, that is not true. He just wants to create divisions and implement people. Brainwash people and make sure that they follow what he says. And the reality of that doesn't exist. He's actually creating more wars and killing civilians on the ground, and that is innocent civilians, no matter what your religion is, or where you're Christian, you're Muslim, you're Yazidi, wherever. He doesn't care, and it just wants to create division between different communities against each other in the region. And I think that's the scary thing. However, people actually believe it, and we have seen many people from our own country in the UK have gone over there to join ISIS. And many other countries as well. And I think this is the danger of it. They are brainwashing people and recruiting. And I think ISIS resurgence is possible. And we have seen that prisons being attacked by Turkey, airstriking, and release of ISIS prisoners. So really, what is Turkey actually wants to accomplish in that region? Why is it interfering in another country? And I think the international community's action has been unacceptable for me, and they've not done the right thing by the people in Syria. And it is very frustrating for me to see that the international community have not done so. The Kurdish people and the people in Syria, especially in northern Syria, have asked for no-fly zone. That has not been given to them. There's airstrikes by Turkey. If actually Turkey wants to create this safe zone, it calls why there's airstrikes against civilians. So why the international community is not acting to create a no-fly zone where the people can be protected from airstrikes? These are all questions that I cannot answer, but it's not been answered by the international community. And the so-called 3 million or 3.6 million refugees is being used as a bargaining chip. Yeah. And I think that's unacceptable by Erdogan, and it shouldn't be happening, but he has already done it, and he knows that he can get away with it, and he's continuing to violate human rights, and there's no consequences for him.
Now, you mentioned there how Turkey is a member of NATO, but NATO has not really spoken out against Turkey's actions here. Do the Kurdish people have any allies? I mean,
not really.
Is there anybody out there, any countries who are speaking out about this?
I mean, I don't think there is. I mean, Israel has come and said this should not be happening. I think they're the only country, maybe probably in the region, speaking against Erdogan's action. However, they are just words. Yeah. They don't mean anything. And maybe it's creating conflicts between the Palestinian and the Kurdish people. They might be doing their own kind of foreign interests, and using this as a tool. So I don't know what is behind it, but we don't have any friends. There's a big saying, and a very famous saying, the Kurdish people have no friends but the mountains. We've only survived because of the mountains. My family, I know my dad from day one is taking, have been fighting the Saddam Hussein regime, and it's been the Peshmergas in south of Kurdistan, north of Iraq, have created a safe zone for the Kurdish people there. We fought for it. We have bloodshed. Many of our people have died. People are refugees I see in here. Their brothers is died in the fire, sister, father, you name it. We're all traumatized as well psychologically. We are been affected by it, and it will stay with us, and it can be triggered by something that we know, and that is what the war is creating more traumas, and we should not be creating more wars, and we should be creating more peace. Why we're creating more war weapons? To do what? To kill people more? And it's just, for me, I don't see this as a solution for the world to become a peaceful country, peaceful world. If we're just creating weapons and mass of destructions, and I don't know why we have weapons. Really, that is something I'm not for it.
That's a good question. Unfortunately, we are going to have to move on here. We will obviously keep watching this story. It is, as you say, it's a real tragedy, and it shouldn't be happening. I mean, there's very little else that I can say about it. We will keep covering this, and I do hope you'll come back and talk to us about it again. In the meantime, one of the people who is somewhat responsible for triggering this attack was Donald Trump. In his rapid withdrawal of US forces from the region, he did essentially give Turkey the green light to carry out this assault. And today he has described the impeachment proceedings that are beginning against him now as a lynching, which has sparked condemnation from across the spectrum in the US for using what is obviously a very racially charged word to describe a perfectly legitimate political and legal process. So a number of people, James Clyburn, the House Majority Whip, said, "I'm not just a politician, I'm a product of the South, and I know the history of that word. That is one word that no president ought to apply to himself." Karen Bass, the chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus, said that his tweet was consistent with his pattern of throwing out racial bombs to give red meat to his base when his back is against the wall. Bobby Rush said, "You think this impeachment is a lynching? What the hell is wrong with you? Do you know how many people who look like me have been lynched since the inception of this country by people who look like you? Delete this tweet." So really strong reactions coming out, but this just seems like another example of Trump using the most inflammatory language he can, creating the most anger and frustration with him. If it were anyone else, if it were somebody who wasn't the President of the United States of America, we would call this trolling.
Yes, if you can see his Twitters and the statement he makes, really, personally, I would say a child has written it. I do not understand how he has become a president of the United States of America. I mean, Trump is really a dangerous man, and he doesn't really know what he's doing. I mean, in a few of his comments against the Kurdish people, he said why they didn't help us in World War II and Normandy. And that is a really weird, and I've been really angry at these statements he has made. And I'm like, the Kurdish people don't have their own state. What they're going to do in Normandy, like, and in World War II, the Kurdish people actually helped the Western world, and he doesn't even know his history. Yeah. So really, this is a man that he doesn't read what he says, and he just says things out of the blue, and he's the president, and this is, and he should be impeached for many things he has stated since he's become a president, but this is not happening.
Yeah, I mean, he is an extraordinary figure, and the most worrying thing for me is that he doesn't seem to understand the consequences of things that he does. Like, it doesn't seem to have occurred to him that withdrawing from Syria would affect the Kurds. No. It doesn't seem to occur to him that it looks really bad to
self-interest.
To
it's
do
very
so much of what he does.
And I mean, he has created a Trump empire in Ankara.
Yeah.
As in Ankara or Istanbul is one of those cities in Turkey. He has. You can say that he has made this as a business offer for himself and for his interest, to agreeing with Turkey. Okay, I'll withdraw my troops in the region if I do this or do that. You can't make foreign policy on base of your own interest and not for the national interest.
And of course, that is one of the key thrusts of the impeachment inquiry. That inquiry is going to run for some time. We will, again, keep up to date with it as it progresses. But, it just becomes more and more crazy every day. Back in Europe, Catalan leader Quim Torra has asked Spain to begin talks on self-determination for Catalonia. This comes just a week or so after we heard the sentences for 9 of the leaders of the independence movement in Catalonia, who were sentenced to between 9 and 13 years for their parts in promoting the referendum on Catalonian independence that happened 2 years ago. There have been 7 consecutive nights of fairly significant protests. And the Committees for the Defence of the Republic, an umbrella group of different organisations, had another rally planned for tonight in Barcelona. The Spanish government has so far not seemed very willing to talk, although, the Catalan leaders have said we must sit down. The Catalan government must have a chance to defend its right to self-determination. He also spoke out against all violence. Of course, there has been significant Spanish violence against the Catalan movement. What do you make of this situation in Spain? Once again, this is a stateless people looking for self-determination and finding violence as a result. Violence and indeed prosecution. What do you make of that situation in Catalonia just now?
Well, I believe the Catalan people should have their independence from Spain if they wish to, but as I am for self-determination, and many people in Scotland is, and many people in support of Catalan and Kurdistan and people who seek self-determination. And it's just really sad when you see politicians who have been fighting for their people's rights are being imprisoned.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think, sorry, we are just going to cut back to Westminster for a minute to hear from Jacob Rees-Mogg. Oh, no, he's just sitting down again.
The Shadow Leader of the House.
Sorry, that was a business statement. We will see if we can get something on that shortly. Sorry.
Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Leader of the House for the business statement, which is as a business statement and not a point of order. But can I also say to the Leader of the House that he heard Her Majesty's opposition, and he will know that we on this side of the
we will
House
just keep an eye on that
ready to work with the government, and I know the Chief
to
Whip
see if we get anything on what's happening at Westminster tomorrow. This is, I believe, what's being discussed just now.
Mr. Speaker, this is important because it was only.
But yeah, sorry. This the Catalan situation. It is really shocking that in a Western democracy, and again, we've seen the EU, for example, refuse to speak out against Spain. Do you think there's anything that we can do to encourage our governments and these larger, multinational organizations to do more for these dispossessed peoples?
Well, yeah, we should be doing more, of course. I think as solidarity, I think the Scottish people and Catalan people should be aligned, really. And I think we have shown support to them, and in many of our demonstrations we are proudly raising their flags, and we are in solidarity with them. And we've, as we know, Amir Anwar has been actually supporting in the legal system, like the Catalonian people, and making sure that they get justice, really, and because they've not received justice in Spain, I think we should be in support of them, and there should be more being done in the world. It's just the time and the efforts and who to contact and who to do it.
Yeah, we are lacking a lot of good leadership in the world. Johnson, Trump, people like Erdogan, Putin. We are not blessed with great leaders committed to democracy. It's a real sad situation. So just finally, we do have some good news to report today. This is from the National Dental Inspection Programme for Scotland, which shows that dental health is continuing to improve in Scotland. Up from 2017, 4 out of 5 primary 7 children had no obvious decay in their permanent teeth in 2019. These reports started back in 2005 when that rate was only 53%, and it has been a very consistent rise ever since then, reaching a full 80% this year. And the Public Health Minister, Joe Fitzpatrick, said, "These statistics show that the dental health of children across Scotland continues to improve, with no obvious signs of decay in 4 out of 5 P7 children, up from around half in 2005. The report also shows a narrowing in oral health inequalities, which is encouraging. To ensure we continue to tackle this, we have extended the Child Smile programme so that children living in our most deprived areas are entitled to receive fluoride varnish applications at nursery or at school, in addition to those at their dental practice." So this clearly is good news. Scotland doesn't have the greatest history of great dental health. I try not to open my mouth too widely on camera in case you see the state of mine. But yeah, I mean, this has got to be good news.
Too many
it?
Iron Brews.
Too much tablet in my case, I think. But yeah, what do you make of these results? It's good news.
It's
right?
good news. Yes, I can see the statistic is we're improving in Scotland. It just shows that how the great we are in Scotland, and that's why we should be independent. We're doing much better than the rest of the countries.
Well, that's an excellent note to end on. Rosa, I do apologise that we had to keep cutting into
problem.
hearing you talk tonight. This
been
is one of the perils of having Brexit going on and all this crazy behaviour going on in Westminster. We do sometimes have to just cut away. But I would like to thank you very much for joining us. And to our audience at home, I would just like to say, as always, making TV programmes is an expensive business. In order to keep the lights on here at Broadcasting Scotland, never mind to keep making the kind of programmes we want to make, we do need you to sign up as a supporter. So if you're able to, your £5 a month will make a huge difference. So you can go to it's at the bottom of the screen, become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter at broadcastingscotland.scot/register. As I say, your £5 a month can make a huge difference. So once again, just our thanks to Rosa Sally for joining us, our thanks to you for joining us tonight, and we will be back again same time tomorrow night. Thank you, good night.